Australia's quiet collapse by how money works. I had no idea Australia was doing bad. I mean, we just watched a video about, ancient human and stuff they had to deal with, but, as far as like modern human, I feel like Australia is like head on earth in terms of the creatures and monsters that they have to deal with. I mean, every time I see some news about some like insect or animal from Australia, it's just like horrific. It's like, yeah, it's terrifying. Anyway, I'm sure it's not related to that.
Staying on top of all the developments in finance, business, and economics can be exhausting. Between everything becoming an excuse to gamble, corporate consolidation of markets, and political influence driving huge asset bubbles, causing extreme wealth inequality, spiraling consumer debt, and diminishing savings, stagnating wages, unaffordable real estate, and generational wealth divides, all string tied together by questionable government programs, it's enough to get pretty depressing.
Shit is fucked
but
indeed.
Just remember, it could be worse. We could be Canada. And if that wasn't bad enough, somehow there is a country that is pushing these issues even further, and as a warning for how bad things could get, has managed to hold on for now. Let's call it Canada with snakes.
Around 200,000 electronic poker machines,
I think it's worse than just the
pokies,
snakes.
fill bars, pubs, clubs and casinos.
Capping losses at $100 a day and $5,000 a year.
Australia is officially the worst on record, with the average property costing 8 times the median household income.
Sydney's rental market has gone from bad to worse, with prices continuing to soar.
With revelations, taxpayer money is being used on drugs.
Every year, up until it...
I don't know if people notice, but I used to not really care when I was young, but like, every time I see clips these days of like news media like that, they're always smiling while saying the most fucked up thing. It always feels so weird, like they're smiling while talking about like some fucked up subject.
Downfall, Credit Suisse would prepare
so
a
weird.
report that looked at how wealthy the people of the countries around the world were. Instead of just looking at GDP per capita, which calculates how much the average person in an economy produces in market output every year, this report attempted to calculate the net worth of those people to see how good they were at accumulating wealth over time. Someone with a high income that is spending everything they make on rent and overpriced food isn't going to grow their wealth as quickly as someone who has a more modest income but is paying off their own home and is investing diligently into retirement accounts. I like to call this the San Fran tech bro conjecture. But according to these annual reports, the Australian people always looked like the second group of slower, more deliberate wealth builders. Their raw income isn't as high as here in America, but they were consistently some of the wealthiest people on the planet. UBS, which acquired Credit Suisse following its collapse, recently released the 2024 report, and once again, Australians had the second highest median net worth on the planet. They only fell behind Luxembourg, which is a European micronation which you are probably not in the tax bracket to even be aware of. The fact that this report tracks the median instead of the average net worth is also really important. This means that the Australian right in the middle of a lineup from the richest to the poorest is more than twice as rich as an American in the same position. The report also includes a generic average where America does have a slight edge, but all that really tells us is that we have an inequality problem with a small group right at the top massively dragging up the average at the expense of everybody else in line. Considering all of this, the title of this video might not make much sense to you. Anybody would be lucky to be Australian, right? Well, yes and no. And lucky really is the important word here. Australia has become so wealthy by...
I mean, it's like a lot of things, right? Like, is it just the perception of, this seems like a lot of money, but then you look at the actual country and what things cost, and then it's not a lot of money anymore? It might be what it is, right? I mean... even if you tell me like, in this country, like $100,000 is a lot, in another country, it's maybe not as much, you don't know.
Getting lucky in just a few key industries, and then by going all in on keeping those industries alive by any means necessary, including its own long-term viability. Of course, the most obvious place where this has happened is in the country's outrageous real estate market, which makes even the most overpriced cities in...
Give me a second. Much light. better, I would say.
America looked downright affordable by comparison, and of course we will get to that. But housing is actually only just one symptom of much bigger structural problems that the country has been quietly trying to ignore. There are lots of people that look like they are happily building wealth in Australia, and there are even a lot of people becoming extremely wealthy. But the different ways to actually obtain that wealth are very narrow. The key to Australian wealth is dirt. Either digging it out of the ground to export as unimproved natural resources, or by selling it back and forth to one another.
Export
Economic
dirt?
complexity ranks a country's exports based on how varied they are, and how unique they are to that country. A country that exports a wide variety of highly unique products that only it produces would have high economic complexity. A country that only exports a few goods that lots of other countries also export would have
the top exports of Australia are iron ore, coal, briquettes, petroleum gas, gold, and other minerals.
low economic complexity. Australia has the lowest economic complexity of any high-income country in the world, ranking 102nd out of 146 total countries included in the survey. That has been falling consistently since the 1950s, when it was in the top 30 thanks to a combination of manufacturing as well as research and development coming out of the country. But today, this puts it behind places like Uganda, which have a more varied export base than Australia. It now depends almost exclusively on selling natural resources and livestock to growing economies in Asia because it just doesn't make financial sense to focus anywhere else. Having such a resource-dependent economy means investors have to decide between funding new innovations that could improve the world, or at the very least provide sustainable cash flows, or they could invest into developing more mines to export more resources to an existing list of willing buyers. The second option has just been a much safer bet for decades, which means that the country has some of the most advanced natural resource extraction in the world, but is severely behind in other areas of innovation like technology and advanced manufacturing.
Well, I guess you do with what you
tragic
have.
irony, the Australian government itself has helped to fund a lot of scientific research resulting in advancements in solar panels, the advent of Wi-Fi, modern medical tools, and even Google Maps. Any of these alone would be a major contributor to the country's relatively small population. But when it came to actually commercializing these technologies, the country lost out because its dependence on natural resources undermined its business environment. Investors would rather the safe, predictable option, and so these technologies naturally moved to where they could find funding from other sources that were willing to take a risk. Unfortunately for Australia, this actually just ended up making their investment markets even more risky. For a long time, the Australian dollar was almost perfectly correlated with natural resource prices, which meant Australian investors were resource investors whether they liked it or not. This price connection has decoupled.
Let me turn off one more light. I guess the sun is coming on strong. Alright, I can't do any more than that.
Since COVID,
if I get orange again,
but that
well,
itself is probably not a good sign.
It is what it is.
It could actually be the biggest indication that Australia has dug itself into a hole, both literally and figuratively, that it's going to be almost impossible to get out of without giving up a lot of the wealth it's become accustomed to. So it's time to learn how money works to find out how long Australia can keep getting away with it. This week's video is sponsored by Henson Shaving. Henson is on a mission.
I mean, as long as they have like those natural resources, and Australia is massive, right? So it should still be for a long time, no?
To revolutionize shaving, creating a skin-friendly experience that eliminates irritation, razor burn, and ingrown hairs. They're challenging the frustrations we've all come to accept, and proving there's a better way. Their Henson razor, engineered with aerospace-grade precision in Canada, features recyclable double-edged blades that cost just pennies. Unlike wasteful cartridge razors, it's built for both sustainability and exceptional control, giving you a smooth, irritation-free shave without compromise. I've been using the Henson razor for 5 months, and the difference is unbelievable. Shaving used to be a hassle, constant irritation, bumps, and the never-ending cost of replacement blades. Now my skin feels healthier, and the process is faster, smoother, and way more enjoyable.
I'm gonna say something surprising, but I've never used the razor like that.
I actually look forward
I've always
to.
shaved
What sets Henson apart is their commitment to both your skin and the environment.
Shaver,
the razor helps reduce the billions of plastic disposables that end up in landfills every year, all while delivering a safer, superior shave.
I don't like
baby face. Whether you shave daily
looking.
or just occasionally, this razor completely changes the experience. Say goodbye to irritation and waste, and hello to a healthier, more sustainable shave. Go to hensonshaving.com/HMW and enter code HMW at checkout to get 100 free blades with your purchase of a Henson razor. That's enough refills for 2 years of shaving. There are dozens of serious problems just under the surface in Australia that you might not think of much by themselves, but together they changed the optics of the country from a thriving and vibrant economy to a place living on long borrowed time. One of those issues is gambling. Sports gambling, online casinos, and market wagering has become one of the fastest growing industries here in America since regulations were loosened in 2018. Since then, billions of dollars have been piled into carving out market share, encouraging people to bet on basically anything. The rush to acquire customers has become so extreme that a lot of these companies aren't even running their online casinos at a profit because they are reinvesting as much as they can into growing their customer base as fast as possible. The reason why investors don't mind burning billions of dollars in a highly risky industry with serious regulatory risks is because of Australia. Australia is living in the future when it comes to gambling, and that future is bleak. According to their own government inquiries, Australians lose almost $1,000 per person every year through different forms of betting. That's inclusive of a large share of the population who don't partake at all, so the losses of the average Aussie punter are statistically far worse. Australia has a deep, wide, and highly entrenched gaming industry. The average Australian pub operates like a mini casino complete with a small selection of electronic poker machines. Betting on sports is commonplace. Horse racing is a major tradition that even has its own public holiday. Novelty betting markets has been a major thing there for decades, and this is all on top of more traditional gambling like lotteries, casinos, and scratch-offs. Back here in America, the venture capitalists have done the math and have figured out if they can replicate Australian-style gambling in a market as big as ours, then they can stand to make trillions. Australia is also a great business test case against the risk of regulation. Unsurprisingly, the sheer market penetration of gambling in Australia has caused problems for at-risk individuals, largely young men. On top of the financial consequences of losing thousands of dollars every year, the country has an epidemic of related issues like fraud, petty crime, and violence stemming from unhealthy gambling. The public...
I mean, like, I think we all know, like, I think we all understand that, like, 99% of the time, people are not healthy gambling. I don't know. I'm exaggerating. I feel like it's one of those things where, like, you know, most people who gamble are not doing it healthily. It's just almost a given, right? I don't know. So, like, yeah, this is kind of crazy. I had no idea Australia was like that. You know, in Japan, for example, like, they don't allow, like, direct gambling, so they have a lot of other bullshit, like pachinko and stuff like that. You know, which people often criticize and say, like, it's kind of weird, crazy loophole industry. But then you've got a country like that, and I guess the US too, where it's, like, so straightforwardly, like, allowed, and seems like it's on such a level of, like, being spread. I mean, it's kind of insane. It's kind of insane.
Also largely hates how prevalent gambling is pushed on them. So you would expect it would be easy to get the political support to pass laws to moderate the reach of this industry, right? Wrong. All of these companies employ lots of people, and they spend a huge amount of money on fear-mongering the job losses that would come if a local bar couldn't have a casino floor stapled onto it. For any of you who haven't been to Australia, you might think I am joking. I am not joking. Australia has been extremely soft on regulation, and while gambling by itself is not single-handedly going to take down the country, it's emblematic of a lot of genuine issues that aren't getting addressed because nobody wants to be responsible for shaking up the delicate balance of prosperity. The same is true for the mining industry from earlier, and the real estate crisis that we still need to get to. There is nothing wrong with the country exporting its resources. The problem Australia has had is turning a revenue source that is good for Australia into money that is good for Australians. A lot of the revenue generated by mining in Australia has just been paid out to foreign mining companies in arrangements that are not that different from many exploited third world petrostates. Australia has...
Okay, you know what? I'll go back to normal subtitles with the black bar because, you know, this looks better when it works, but most of the time it's over white and then you can't read it. I mean, people sometimes tell me, like, you should take off the window opacity thing, but again, at least here I can actually read the subtitles.
Tried in the past to generate more government revenue from its resources, but heavy lobbying won out, and people have been too afraid to try it again since the currency has been so dependent on these exports. In fact, the government has actually gone the other way and given hundreds of obscure grants, bonuses, deferments, schemes, and incentives to mining companies to help them along. According to the government's own minerals website, the intention of these schemes is for providing both commercial and operational advantages to investors. New government initiatives support the long-term sustainability of the Australian resources sector by de-risking and encouraging mineral exploration and discovery. One of the country's biggest problems is that nobody wanted to invest anywhere else, so this does seem a bit strange. But destabilizing this source of foreign income could knock over other highly leveraged areas of the economy, so their government is trying to keep it running hot by whatever means necessary. Now, at this point you might be thinking, how the f did this place get so rich to begin with? Was it really just putting a bigger number on their homes and calling that wealth? Well, yes, but there actually is still one more thing. Australia has a system called superannuation, which is a special tax-advantaged investment vehicle that Australian workers can use to save and invest for their retirement. It's functionally similar to a 401k or an IRA, but the big difference is that employers must contribute a share of their employees' pay into their nominated account every year, instead of it being voluntary or offered as a part of their job package. The current contribution requirement is 11.5%. Which means every Australian worker is effectively saving more than 10% of their income for retirement. Something like that would make even a lot of disciplined financial planners blush. The hope is that this money will eventually take the strain off the public-funded pensions as the Australian population gets older, and it has built some enormous fortunes. According to JP Morgan, the average Australian household now has the equivalent of almost $250,000 invested in just this one asset class, before including regular savings, investments, or home equity. The fact that it is mandatory and applied to all workers means that the concentration of retirement savings in the hands of already wealthy households isn't as high as it is here in America. This is genuinely an amazing financial tool, and you might be starting to notice a trend here. It has covered over a lot of other problems. Collectively, Australian superannuation is worth more than $2 trillion USD, which is only enough to buy 2/3 of Apple, but it has outgrown the Australian investment market because investment activity is just not as strong there. This means more and more of these retirement savings have been invested abroad, with the majority of that money ending up back here in the American markets. Now, that alone is not a bad way to diversify risk outside of Australia. And yes,
I didn't know. That's interesting. Yeah.
All getting pumped into the Magnificent Seven, but that's all investing these days. What could possibly go wrong? The real problem is that Australia is technically taking their cash, which is propped up by a mining industry, and then giving it to us so that we can build businesses here in America. A lot of Australian companies, which are not in the gaming, mining, or real estate industry, are actually choosing to raise investments and go public here in America instead. Simply because we have more investors that are willing to put money into companies that aren't in gambling, mining, or real estate. I mean, thanks, I guess. But if the country was more accommodating of other investments, it could use a lot of this savings to make its people and itself wealthier and more productive. The wealth invested into the Australian superannuation system may also be very impressive, but it won't actually do much unless it can keep up with how expensive it is to live in Australia. A common strategy for Australian workers is to wait until they can access their retirement savings, take all of the money they accumulated over their working career, and use it to pay off their house. So yeah, this is where we finally get to the elephant in the room.
So you can do that? Interesting. Okay.
Real estate.
I see.
The cost of housing in Australia has made every single problem so far even worse, and it's also going to make
Australia is upside down Canada. Lots of the economy is material extraction, British colony, massive sparsely populated land. Everyone lives in 4 cities. I guess that's true, yeah. They're not that different. That makes sense.
It's much harder to fix.
That makes sense.
According to a broad market survey, the average age of a first home buyer in Australia is 36 years old. And the fastest growing group of people buying a home for the first time are those aged between 40 and 49. Homes are so expensive that they are usually taken on with a 30-year mortgage, and families will move into larger homes as they build up equity. So a lot of Australians are now getting to the age they would like to retire still in massive debt. Using the proceeds from superannuation to pay off their mortgage doesn't technically make them any poorer. They have just transferred retirement savings into real estate equity. But it does allow them to access the government's public old age pension, since it's not counted as an asset to assess if they have the ability to fund themselves. Since
Okay.
paying a mortgage or rent normally takes up so much of people's budget there, giving up retirement savings often works out to be more financially responsible because even a modest pension income can cover everything else as long as they have a paid-off house to live in.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
For many households, this has made one of Australia's greatest wealth-building tools just another way to prop up a real estate market that is already so expensive that the rest of the world should be afraid of it. But how did it get this bad in the first place? There is the usual combination of investor speculation, generous financing, NIMBYism, and high levels of migration into cities
NIMBYism.
that couldn't expand fast enough. But on top of that, Australia has added its own special ingredients. Taxes on earned income in Australia are some of the highest in the world. Someone earning the equivalent of just 120,000 American dollars a year would pay 45% on every additional dollar they earned after that.
Wow.
And remember, Australia is not a cheap place to live. So even though that would be a very good salary
lot.
for anybody, it's not actually going to go that far after tax is taken out. However, one of the unique features of Australia is the fact that personal investment losses, including paper real estate losses, can be used to write off personal income to reduce their tax. This effectively makes every person in Australia their own little business that can accrue expenses to
Interesting.
offset their tax. And the best business to get into with the most possible expenses
unique.
is real estate. This tax structure has encouraged high-income earners to favor investing in a real estate that they can use to make paper losses like depreciation to offset their income, and then turn highly taxed earned income into much more modestly taxed capital gains. The system, called negative gearing, is almost universally agreed to be broken. It would
Okay.
be a lot easier to tax everybody at a lower rate and get rid of these write-offs. But it's been really hard to make that happen because they can't afford this house of cards to unravel. There is now so much debt and wealth tied up in Australian housing that the Australian economy could be wiped out.
And frankly, I guess that's kind of like a lot of countries that are kind of like stuck in this kind of thing. Not exactly like this situation, but the situation of like the system that have been created are, have been proven to be imperfect, but at the same time, the prospect and idea of like trying to fix it, change it, or something, and the problem that might cause, which might break a lot of other things going along with it, is often why we don't see change, right? I mean, it's often like built on such a rickety base that a lot of things could break, and that's why nothing really
And
changed.
even the indication that the government could rein in these incentives. The same thing is happening with other less obvious policies as well. Immigration to Australia has been some of the most intense in the world, and the country has become highly dependent on low-income immigrants to do a lot of the jobs they aren't willing to, and high-income immigrants to also buy into their asset market. According to Henley Partners, a law firm specializing in legal arrangements for high-net-worth immigrants, over 40% of the millionaires in Australia today were not born there. Some have, of course, gone there and made their fortunes, but most have just gone there and parked their fortunes that they already had. In all of the
Honestly, that
biggest
makes sense. Like in France, it's also like a very known thing, right? Like anybody who gets rich, a lot of the celebrities, or even I guess someone who makes a lot of money, they just instantly like move to like some other country, lower tax, and then they still mostly like live in France, but yeah, they don't want their money taken, right? I guess it's a classic. As bad as recession are, they do serve a purpose. Australia missing out on the 2008 recession meant housing prices didn't crash, so there's more confidence about real estate investment.
issues in the world
Makes
today,
sense.
Australia is a look at what 10 years from now could mean for us. And perhaps the biggest problem is that so far they have managed to keep everything on track. But there is a difference between success and delayed consequences. Australia has some of the most valuable banking institutions in the world, but most of their books are tied up in lending to an overvalued real estate market. Workers are getting taxed heavily while dealing with declining real incomes. Businesses are finding it too expensive to operate there, and all of the wealth in the world, paper or otherwise, doesn't mean anything if it can only buy you a one-bedroom apartment 2 hours from anywhere. Now, if you are an Australian and this was all a bit depressing for you, it could be worse. You could be from the UK. Also, go and watch this video on Canada next to find out how they
have seen
effectively made
quite a few
exactly the
videos
same
about the UK
mistakes as
situation, which
Australia
is also-
without even accidentally
mess.
making themselves rich in the process.
Brexit was
And
definitely
make
not the
sure to
best
like and
idea, but that's
subscribe
only
to keep
one
on
problem.
learning how money works.
Okay, I mean, I can't claim I followed absolutely everything. Some of the stuff here was probably beyond me, but yeah, I get the gist of it. It's definitely a mess. I mean, you know, so many countries are right now facing like such house of card kind of problem, where like on one hand things are like somewhat still holding, even though there's a lot of problem. So you don't want to break the existing and somewhat working system, but at the same time maybe it would be better to like break everything and rebuild everything. Even though I guess it would hurt for a while, right? I mean, it's all beyond me for the most part. I'm not super deep into this kind of things and understanding of how country works, government, and everything. But it definitely seems like, there's a lot of things that should be changed. But at the same time, I guess the fear of like trying to change things to only make it worse or something is stopping a lot of things from happening. I guess is how I see it. Okay, really good video. I mean, super interesting. Super interesting.